Hello, everyone, and welcome to CAE OneWorld 2021. In this panel discussion showcasing CAE Defense Security business within Canada. My name is Jacques Morin. I'm the Business Development Director for Canada region. I'm joined today with Jeff Tasseron. He's our Director of Strategic Growth and Acquisition, as well as Scott Greeno, our Director of NATO Flying Training in Canada. We also have the privilege of having Tom Lawson, formerly Canada Chief of Defense Staff. Tom has had a long and distinguished career with the Canadian Air Force. He's now a senior strategic advisor to CAE. Welcome, gentlemen. Our discussion today will focus on CAE's operation across Canada, notably our in-service support capability and the mission operation support we provide to the Canadian Forces. We're also going to highlight what we do in Canada, how we export our capability globally, which is an important consideration in Canada defense procurement. Our discussion will provide an overview of our key activities within the region and how we'll best support CAE's customer. First, I'd like to give you a bit of an overview of CAE and CAE Canada region. As you know, CAE has been in the business of modeling, simulation, and training for over 70 years. We have operation coast to coast now. We employ 4,500 people in Canada, 1,000 of them being women, and we also have operate out of 15 different sites. And we provide a lot of training and modeling simulation at places like Gagetown and Greenwood and Comox, Winnipeg, Trenton, as well as Petawawa. Same with our NATO flying training operation in Moose Jaw and Cold Lake. But we also support the maintenance contract and support across all different sites. And we provide key training support for fixed wing SAR, for example. But moreover, what people don't realize is over the years we've moved also into much more of the mission operational support platforms such like the MHP out of Halifax, as well as supporting the F-18 fleet out of Mirabel, Quebec. And more now we're getting to the in support of land and naval support. So today's discussion will focus certainly on training, but also on mission support and operation. So let's now engage in the panel discussion. We'd like to focus the first topic on the mission operational support. So my first question is directed to Tom. Tom, you recently joined CAE as a senior strategic advisor. From an operational support perspective, how do we leverage our current expertise in operation support? Why does the military need mission operational support from industry? Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Jacques. When we look back, ever since the start of the Cold War, and especially since the end of the Cold War, nations like Canada and our allies largely look to maintain an edge over potential adversaries, not so much through mass numbers, lots of people and lots of equipment, but through an edge given by technology and innovation. Not only Canada, but most of our Western allies are the same way. So for that, nations like Canada really look to business partners, trusted business partners like CAE to provide them solutions based on technology and innovation to maintain that keen edge in the development of capabilities that make us ready to defend those things that we treasure.
Thanks, Tom. So Jeff, from your perspective, how does the support model is changing? What are the challenges and opportunities we the industry are facing?
Well, I think maybe to extend on Tom's comments, I mean, obviously there are vast changes in technology that are going on right now. But I think another piece of the support model is also the reality that we're entering an age where having experienced personnel, having access to labor, is a really difficult sort of a challenge for industry and militaries alike to overcome. And so militaries have to sort of expand their aperture on how they use talent and how they employ it. And I think the best among the Western militaries are recognizing that a balance between uniformed personnel and people coming out of industry that have some of the very specialized skill sets are becoming a big piece of maintaining both the technological edge and as well being able to put combat power and capabilities into the field. So I think it's a bit of a two-part challenge. Obviously, from the standpoint of building platforms and bringing new combat capabilities into the battle space, industry and militaries have worked together hand in glove for many, many years. But now we're seeing the extension of that model into some new capabilities where civilian people are taking very significant roles in providing militaries with capabilities that it may not be cost effective for the militaries to develop internally and field themselves. So I think that's a huge area of opportunity. There are some challenges that go along with it. It changes how the military might want to do recruitment. It changes the kind of work environment that industry may ask of its people. And of course, as we saw in some campaigns like Afghanistan, it can present some very real conundrums to industry, particularly when civilian personnel are employed, close to the front edge or in situations where they might be exposed to more risk. But on balance, I think it's a positive trend, and certainly it's one that CAE really embraces in terms of getting as close as we can to our client, to the military, to provide them the best possible services.
Thanks, Jeff. Now I'd like to direct your question to Scott from a live flying training perspective, because we do support that aspect, which is also part of the mission support operation. So how does live operation support experience help the Canadian Forces be successful, Scott?
Well, thanks. First of all, thanks so much for the opportunity to be on the panel, and I feel honored to be a part of this group, particularly with retired General Lawson. Him and I, he was a key factor in my early training as a pilot in the Canadian Forces, and it's amazing how life is when you find yourself in interesting situations further down the road. But anyway, very much honored to be a part of the panel. As in the intro, being the director of NFTC operations, CAE's director of NFTC operations out in Moose Jaw, has been just a great privilege. It's a true partnership that we have with the Royal Canadian Air Force in the training of the next generation of Canadian Forces pilots. And as Jeff mentioned, it represents sort of an example of the Canadian Forces taking a different approach to providing operational support. Very late in the 90s, Canada was faced with an aging fleet of training aircraft, and they needed to make a decision on how they were going to tackle that challenge of replacing that fleet. Alternate service delivery type options were just coming into the Canadian Forces, and the decision was made to go full throttle in terms of alternate service delivery here in Moose Jaw. So as far as CAE's part in this, in the training of pilots, we do a ground-based training system. That's sort of what CAE is known for. You guys talked about that before, the 75 years of experience in terms of mission, mission simulation, flight simulators. So we provide all the academic training to the student pilots. We do the simulator training, basically preparing the pilots to get out to the flight line. And then of course, the one that's probably the most complex and the hardest thing that we do here in Moose Jaw is the aircraft production, taking care of two very complex aircraft, making sure those airplanes are serviceable, they're airworthy, and safe for the pilots. So that involves about 140 personnel here in Moose Jaw. It's a large, complex operation. And as well, the one thing that's largely not known is the site services aspect. So, often folks talk about systems of systems, and our participation in our program here is a classic example of a system of systems. Very many people working, they're doing various aspects, various roles within the training system. And each one is as important as the other. The front face of it is the airplanes on the ramp, but there's a whole sort of iceberg under the water of support to make those airplanes serviceable and safe for our customer. And so the guy out cutting the grass is as important as the guy that's putting gas into the airplane. And so, we've got a tremendous amount of experience. I talked about, we talked about military folks moving into civilian life. I mean, a large majority of our folks that work out here side by side with the military personnel used to be in the military themselves, and so they understand sort of the perspective of a military member and carry the pride that they had as being a military technician or pilot or whatever the case may be into their role as a civilian. So it's you know, this is an example of operational support. That experience can lend itself well into, you know, future type things like the RPAS opportunity and others.
Yeah, I think Scott raises a really good point with that system of systems observation. And you know, one of the things that I think has emerged over the past few years is, you know, the importance of, or rather, I guess maybe the skill sets and the experience that comes out of being a strong simulation company and understanding what's required to create immersive environments to allow that sort of training. And I think that, you know, the Air Force often over the ages has sort of been viewed as kind of one of the higher technology professions. And I think in this case, we're seeing a lot of penetration from those technologies into the other environments, which are realizing that, you know, whether it's on the land or at sea or in the joint environment, they need to have access to very high fidelity simulations in order to train as they fight. And frankly, to go beyond providing, you know, sort of military front-end capabilities when it comes to mission planning, rehearsal, a whole bunch of sort of the ancillary mission support functions. Those also require very carefully engineered environments. And as a result of that sort of flight simulator pedigree and the ability to create not only compelling visual presentations, but also to simulate an electromagnetic environment or some of the background data that builds a real world, I think CAE is able to leverage a bunch of those technologies into land and into naval and into the joint realm to really start to feed that deep training need for not only individual training, but also collective training and higher level command and staff training.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. That's a very good perspective as well. Now I'd like to look at the future perspective of the business. And maybe I'd like to get your insight, all three of you guys. Here's a question I'm going to pose, and maybe I'll start with Tom. So regarding the future concept of operation, what does the government or customer look for in terms of innovation? And what do you guys see as a year from the government, from system to system, and the perspective of Canada? What would the force need as a trusted partner such as CAE? So Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Jacques. You know, when you look at Canada's approach to defense, a couple of things stand out. First of all, we always work inside alliances. You know, you look to NORAD's success over 50 plus years in protecting the aerospace of the continent with our partners to the south. You look at NATO and our 20-some partners inside that alliance, and how we've always been a very relied upon partner there, and our coalition most recently in Iraq against ISIS. We'll always work within partnerships, alliances, and coalitions. Secondly, Canada's always very reluctant and hesitant to invest many dollars in defense. Frankly, we are one of the few nations in the world that has the luxury not to invest heavily, no matter what the world's environment looks like in terms of security. Those dollars look discretionary because Canadians largely feel safe. So when you put those two things together, what Canada does is it looks to leverage every single dollar they put in defense for the absolute leading edge of technology and innovation, and kind of building on some points really well made by Scott and Jeff in the last question. Canada looks to partners, and CAE has been such an excellent partner over recent decades in bringing those solutions based on technology and innovation that allow Canada to develop really elite, small, but professional capabilities that not only protect Canadian interests, but fit really well into those alliances when we're needed. CAE has done that for a long time, and the Canadian Armed Forces will look for many years ahead for those same sort of solutions that allow them to maintain that elite professionalism that we've become known for across certainly the Air Force, but also the Army, Navy, and Special Operations.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Great perspective. maybe turn this over to Jeff from your perspective on innovation as well.
Well, I think obviously everything that the general mentioned just a moment ago is absolutely correct. I mean, that coalition view is really ingrained in the DNA of the military. I guess I'd go a bit beyond that to say that, you know, we're coming through a really strange and difficult time right now. And as awful and challenging as it has been, I think there's also a kind of a collective realization that it causes us to reevaluate some of how we have done things in the past. And in one of those areas, I think we're seeing a bit of an extension of the national security and the national resilience concept outside of sort of the pure traditional military realm and into the public safety and security realm and into government operations in general. And I would like to think that, you know, sort of as we look at a country about how we secure our national estate and prepare ourselves for the future, you know, we're going to look at innovative ways of partnering internally as well. And so, you know, when you look across, you know, public institutions like the RCMP, like Public Safety Canada, like Health Canada, I think we're seeing a lot of repetition in the sense that the same kinds of capabilities that Canada's armed forces have brought to the fight over years in terms of command and control, in terms of training excellence, modeling, simulation, and the like, those are the very same capabilities that we need in other sectors of the government. And certainly CAE is proud to be part of those discussions and to really view itself as part of that national public safety and security estate. And so I think, you know, as we look to leverage those investments and to spend money better in the future, I think that logically we're going to look at wherever there are opportunities to inject some of the learning, some of the technologies and capabilities that the military is adopting or has adopted, and start to push those into different levels of society. Unfortunately, that's coming at pretty much the exact same time that a lot of the barriers to entry around prices of technology, around high security computing, high speed computing, high security networks, those are becoming more accessible within the broader sphere of government. And so we really see some tremendous opportunities and frankly, some tremendous need in that area.
Great, thanks, Jeff, for the insight. Now I'll turn over to Scott then. And how do we, you know, that innovation part, what's your perspective? We start applying this to how we train our air crews and pilots and maintainers maybe in the future.
Yeah, I mean, this part of the training, you know, the training world in general, specifically to the pilot training and the aircrew training aspect of it is quite simply fascinating. In my experience, I started out in pilot training in the early '90s, and then over time, I've been back into the training system in one way, shape, or form, sort of every 5 to 10 years. And the one interesting thing, if I could bring sort of a tactical level perspective down here, where we're actually training these future pilots and future aircrew, is that not only do they want and are they interested in the new innovation and the new technology, but they expect it. In the sense that the current generation of young folks that are getting into this business, I mean, if you hand them a stack of books and a pad of paper, they'll look at you like you've got 3 heads. I mean, they expect a laptop, they expect some sort of iPad type device, some sort of tablet device. They expect very interactive, multimedia type training. And they expect, you know, some sort of catered product to their learning style. And these are the types of innovations and technologies that exist out there. And any sort of future aircrew training type solution will have to include these types of technologies. And they need to be you know, well tested, proven, and effective. And linking to the general's comment with respect to we need to get every penny out of that defense dollar well spent and well used, I think that we can use the capabilities of modern simulation, of the modern technologies and the modern learning systems and what we know about adult learning not necessarily to replace flying hours, but to ensure that for, when that student gets in that airplane, they'll fly that mission, they are absolutely prepared to rehearse what they have learned using the other types of devices. So in the past, when we would, get into a briefing room, talk about the thing that we were going to go learn in the plane, and then we would get up and there would be a fair bit of time doing just trial and error, but now we have the opportunity to be extremely knowledgeable from an academic sense about what it is we're getting ready to do. And then we get on various levels of devices, various fidelity devices, we get tremendous amount of opportunity to practice. So by the time I get into the airplane, I've done the thing I'm going to learn a number of times using various different types of media. So that to me is the exciting part of what these innovative technologies will bring to the pilot training and the aircrew training, is this ability to make maximum use of the available flight training hours going forward.
Before we close our panel discussion, I'd like for each of you guys to share some key closing remarks on where we see his ability to positively contribute to Canadian industry and to the well-being of the Canadian. Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Jacques. And this has really been a great chance to connect and to listen to some other teammates at CAE and what's being done all the way up and down in terms of developing the capabilities we need. I smiled when Scott referred to me being in his training. His father was one of my best pilot instructors when I went through in the early 80s, when I went through pilot training. And although I thought we were on leading edge technology back then, my gosh, 10 years later when Scott came through F-18 technology, I really felt like we were sitting on top of the world. My son has just recently passed through Scott's organization in Moose Jaw, and there is no comparison with the technologies and innovations that Scott has just spoken to and that he found as quite normal. No comparison between where he is and the things that helped him as compared to us in the past. But I think it's really important to notice, and this would be my closing remark, or to make note of the fact that all of this training, whether it be Air Force, Army, or Navy, is all in support of Canadian defense and defense of the Western world. And when we look from that point of view, I think it's fair to say that there has never been a more complex defense environment around the world than we see right now. We used to deal in a bipolar world, and then it was unipolar. Now I think you would say it's perhaps tripolar with some really significant adversaries out there, but also there are challenges in cyberspace, space, and even hybrid warfare. And all of these things suggest that Canada and its partners are going to be well challenged in coming years and decades to maintain elite capabilities. And for that, more and more, they're going to need innovation and the techniques brought by really trusted partners like CAE. So we keep in mind that right from the very tactical levels, what we're doing is developing these elite capabilities and professionalism that we're going to need as Canadians and as good partners in alliances to protect, and not only Canadians, but all those things that Canadians hold dear and treasure.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Maybe Scott, over to you as Tom's wingman.
Yes, it's interesting. And as I look at my video feed here, I actually see my father's image there. So it's super interesting little anecdote there. From my perspective, here in Moose Jaw, down here at the tactical level of pilot training and what will be in the near future aircrew training, flying training, aircrew training, live flying operations are complex and hard activities. And I think that we have a really solid foundation of experience in that realm. We know how to do this, and we know all of the required moving parts and the sort of intricacies and interchanges of all those various systems parts. So I think we have a really solid foundation of experience going forward. for many of the opportunities and new programs that are out there now. I really like where we're situated from an innovation and technology point of view. And as I stated in my remarks, it's a must. It is a requirement for future aircrew training type activities. And not just training sort of at the ab initio level, but at the operational training unit level, and as well out at the tactical level, where these types of platforms and operations are taking place, mission rehearsal, all these types of training. The innovation and the technology is paramount and will be paramount going into the future. So I think we're in a really good spot in terms of what we're doing now and what we'll be doing in the future.
Hey, great. Thank you, Scott. And maybe Jack, from your perspective, well beyond the Air Force, what is that like for you on the land side and the Navy side, possibly, and even talk about cyber and space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, between Tom and Scott, they've certainly highlighted really, I think, some of the innovation that's happening within the core of the defense business and the core of the flight training capabilities that CAE offers. I think those are, both, really exciting areas, and we're well positioned. From my standpoint, and from a kind of a strategic growth and a sort of future technology perspective, what really excites me and makes me think that the CAE is in a great spot is the idea that, CAE has such a long pedigree as a key Canadian industry player, and as a developer and enabler of some of these technologies. And then as we sort of juxtapose that with some of the new challenges that are emerging and that we face as a country, I think that in addition to the ability to bring, incredible products and capabilities into simulation, CAE also has shown itself very capable at being a conduit. And that is a conduit for new technologies and new companies. And we see that on the healthcare side, where there's some really impressively progressive ideas around training and around building the next generation of healthcare providers. I think we see it in some of our programs where we're trying to bring in new technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and more fundamentally, where we are reaching out to Canadian companies and Canadian providers. And I mean, we're blessed with a world-class ecosystem in a bunch of these areas. Toronto and Montreal are, vying with each other to be kind of one of the future hubs of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we see pockets of technology right across the country. But as individual companies, particularly as smaller companies, sometimes it is hard to get those technologies and those capabilities onto the radar. And procurement, military procurement, government procurement, that is a difficult nut to crack. And so by virtue of its position within this Canadian industrial landscape, I think CAE is one of those rare companies that is really ideally situated to start to bring some of those technologies in to champion not only our own products, but also the products of other Canadian firms, and to bring them into programs. And I think in doing so, we just create a much more resilient industrial base here in Canada. And I think that's going to be a critical enabler for the future. And I think it's fascinating, and it's a privilege to be at the forefront of it with a Canadian icon like CAE. Hey,
thank you, Jeff. Well, my thanks to all three of you guys for taking the time today to share your insight. You're totally engaged with this, and thank you for participating in today's panel. So I thanks you all on the audience as well, and then we'll see you next time. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Thanks very much, Jacques.